Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, and it's Marylee Nunley, the founder of Retreat and Refresh Stroke Camp and United Stroke Alliance. And I'm here with my grandchildren, although they're not on today, but they're here. And they're trying to get a cord from out behind me. Okay. Thanks for tuning in. I'm happy to have you joining us. Quit being goofballs. United Stroke Alliance is a nonprofit organization that's all about the prevention, the awareness, and the recovery from stroke. And I'm glad to see you here this afternoon. So today we're going to be talking about living with aphasia, and that is something that I have perfected to the degree any human can perfect it over the last 19 plus years. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and my own personal journey, but I always like to make sure that because I'm not a speech language pathologist, I'm just a lay person who's been living with this kind of a disorder, difficulty or handicap, whatever we want to call it, whatever. I don't have an assignment of words. But what aphasia is, for those of you that maybe know what it is but don't know what the name of it is, it's an acquired communication disorder. It impairs a person's ability to process language, but it does not affect intelligence. And that was something that was a little hard for me to learn because I had some embarrassing moments early on after my husband's stroke. So it impairs the ability to speak and also to understand others to some degree. And that, again, is on a spectrum from a little bit to a lot. So it is not a mental illness, it's not an impairment in intelligence. What causes it, the most common reason for aphasia is stroke. It also can be caused with a traumatic brain injury, sometimes mini strokes, TIAs. Brain tumors can also cause aphasia. If someone has a brain tumor, or they might have surgery to remove a brain tumor. There's a few other neurological causes, but the most common is stroke or traumatic brain injury. It infects 2 million Americans. 180 new cases of injury that causes aphasia happen every year. So about 1 in every 275 people have some form of aphasia. It is more common in older people because stroke is more common in older people, but it can occur to anyone along the way. A person can have aphasia without a physical disability, although because of the nature of aphasia, the nature of the cause of aphasia, it is often the right side of an individual will have challenges from an injury or from a brain injury. Can people have aphasia and return to their jobs? That's one of the things. It depends on the level of recovery, so sometimes they can, but if it's a severe case of aphasia, speech and language are almost always necessary for a job. Although we've got some folks in our choir, our Chimes choir, that have aphasia, that have returned different types of jobs, but jobs that don't require a lot of language and a lot of like restaurant work, behind the scenes restaurant work, where they've been real successful and really enjoyed having work again. How long does it take to recover from aphasia? Some people can recover very, very quickly and are almost back to normal in a few months to a year. Others, it becomes the rest of your life. And that's what I have discovered with my husband, is it's kind of the rest of our life. Are all cases of aphasia alike? And the common answer would be no, it's a little bit different. So I'm going to talk a little bit about John's journey, my husband's journey, and then show you some resources and things. But when he had his stroke, I was there with him, and we got right to the emergency room. And the interesting thing was that he didn't even say any words. It was just gibberish, but he chattered. But it was like not even a foreign language, because it didn't even have the sing-song of a foreign language. it was just simply gibberish. And I knew he was having a stroke, but I didn't know about aphasia at the time. So we get to the hospital and they mention all this, it's chaotic those first couple of days, but it was 1 or 2 days after his stroke. It was on a Sunday. So I think it was either Monday or Tuesday when he was able they took him in a wheelchair to speech therapy. First they do the swallowing test, and he did pass the swallow test right away, which we're very thankful for, because I've had other family members that were months and months accomplishing the swallow test. But we got into that first assessment, and I was there throughout all of it, and I'm sitting there in the assessment room, and the speech and language pathologist, who we still are Facebook friends with, her name was Jennifer, and she's an absolute delight. And she's questioning John about different objects. So she's holding up a picture and asking him to identify, and he's saying some gibberish. And then she points to the table that we're sitting by, and he looks at it, and he can't say anything. He can't identify. Then she points to the chair, and he can't identify that. And being who I am, I was so embarrassed. I'm like, I know he knows what that is. I know he knows that's a table. I didn't realize that she was assessing where he was so she would know where to start with his therapy. So it was a little bit of a learning curve, and she assured me after that first session what she was doing and why. I would encourage anyone that is new to stroke or new to any kind of a medical emergency, ask those questions in a gentle and non-accusing way, but ask those questions why. Once I started asking why are we doing this, then it was extremely helpful. The same thing happened in physical therapy and occupational therapy. They were having him do things that seemed childish to him and seemed, he was offended. When I asked why, they said, we have a list. We have to check things off the list to know he's accomplished that to go to the next level. So once I knew that, I explained it to him, and we were good to go. So that was kind of the embarrassing thing. There were some swear words that came out, and I thought he could talk again, but I found out that was involuntary. So that was another kind of fun moment in, oh, good, he can talk. And then they had to break the news that those words are stored, interesting, in a different part of the brain. And his language center was damaged. And it isn't that he doesn't know the words and the thoughts of what he wanted to say were there. It was just simply that he couldn't bring them out. Now, before his stroke, he worked at Caterpillar, and he started out way back in the data processing. So he did a lot of computer programming and writing programs for libraries and all that sort of thing on the back end for processing at Caterpillar. And once he was able to articulate a little bit through the way we communicated for a couple of years, he said it's like it's spinning, and I can't spit it out. So he knew and could think what he wanted to say, but he wasn't able to bring it out. And so, as I learned little things along the way, it helped us in our journey, because, it's a long journey. He was actually in formal speech therapy for 2 years. He did have good benefits through Caterpillar that first year, and then he ended up on Medicare because of long-term disability. But he was progressing enough that he kept having more sessions. And he was very, very adamant that he wanted to learn to talk. They worked a little bit on reading, and he wasn't as passionate about that, because he said, I don't care if I can't read, I want to be able to talk. And everybody has their own, their own path to take. He couldn't say my name early on. He could not say my name, and he would cry because he was very emotional. Those of you that have been through stroke know there's a lot of emotional going on. But he couldn't say my name, and he boo-hooed about that terribly. He finally could articulate my woman. So he would introduce me or point to me or call me my woman. we found it humorous and loving, and it worked for us. But it was okay with me that he couldn't say my name for a long time, but it just ate on him. So it was a year before he could say my name. The same thing was true when our youngest grandson was born. The very same thing was true. His name is Dax, D-A-X. John had never heard that name prior to his stroke, so he couldn't identify with it. It was like a foreign word to him. But he had a nephew named Zach. So he would say Zach instead of Dax. We worked and worked, and by Dax's first birthday, he was able to say Dax's name. Now here's the interesting twist. When we see our nephew Zach, he has trouble calling Zach Zach and often calls Zach Dax. That's how the aphasia brain works. Fascinating. I didn't understand the difference between receptive and expressive aphasia early on, and I wish I had understood that sooner, because my understanding was everything I was saying to John, he understood. And then I realized months in, if not a year, it might have even been a year, close to it, when I finally recognized that he didn't always understand what I was saying. And in that critical first 6 months to a year, you're in such heightened emotion and all of that sometimes you overlook little details. But once I understood the receptive and expressive aphasia, I recognized that his expressive aphasia was probably every bit as bad, if not worse, than his expressive aphasia. In other words, he could start to say a few words and a few phrases correctly, but often interpreted what I said incorrectly. And he also had, and I know this is classic, anyone that's lived with aphasia, he had the classic yes, no. He'd say, I would ask a yes, no question, and he would answer, and sometimes I would have to clarify, did he mean yes or did he mean no? Because he would swap those words. The same still exists with paper, like the newspaper. He'll say paper and mail. He mixes up paper and mail. He might say, did you get the paper? And he might mean the paper, he might mean the mail. So that was another interesting thing. Hands and feet, especially when the grandchildren were tiny and we were putting their gloves or their shoes on, and he would say, give me your, well, it was Dax again. He said, give me your feet, or no, give me your hands. And Dax puts his hands up, and John had shoes in his hand. He meant feet. And little Dax just went right along with it. Elbow and knee, he gets mixed up. So a lot of those similarities, he will still, even after over 19 years, he'll still substitute those words. But, you know, you learn to live with it. You learn to do a lot of game playing in getting the questions out there. And, you know, it kind of is what it is. I'm going to show you a couple of resources that I have discovered fairly recently. Someone on our Facebook page purchased and gifted to United Stroke Alliance 3 books that she had discovered, and her name escapes me in this moment. I apologize. I'll try and put that in the notes. But one of them, and I'm backwards on my, there we go. The ABCs of Aphasia, and it's a stroke primer. This was written by a gentleman who had a PhD. I think he was a college professor when he had a stroke and had severe aphasia. And I truly, truly think this, if you know of anyone that's had a stroke and has aphasia, this would be the best gift you could give them in the whole wide world. And it's available on Amazon. But it has the A through Z with all the different things related to stroke, related to therapy, and related to aphasia. And aphasia can be so much. Difficulty speaking, difficulty understanding, difficulty reading, and difficulty writing. John still can sign his name, and he can sign love, L-O-V-E. If I write it for him, he can copy it. But he really can't spell anything. He even has trouble, like we go to the eye doctor and they do the eye chart. He writes the letters up in the air. They're very understanding because he said in his brain he knows what letter it is, but he can't always say it. And I know the other day when we were at the eye doctor, it was an H. And he goes, I can't remember what letter, I think he said it was an A. He said, that's an A, one of these. And he drew the H perfectly, but he said A. And then he'll say one of these, like an E or an F. And then sometimes he'll say that's a Z and he'll be correct. But they've learned to work with him for that, which is another fascinating part of aphasia. The Broca's area of the brain is the one that's closest linked to speech production. And the Broca's area, there's two areas of speech, and this book has a wonderful, let's see, this way, there we go. This book has a wonderful description of that. And it was so helpful when I learned this in another manner. But when I learned it, it was in a really high-tech, kind of an educational book. This one is written very, very simply. Ischemic stroke, hemorrhagic stroke. Just, it's a beautiful, beautiful book. Now, in addition to this book, which will be traveling with us to our stroke camps, so any of our participants at stroke camp can see them, she also gifted me with two other books. This is for the individual that really wants to delve into it because they're very detailed, but it is the Stroke Diary, a primer for aphasia therapy, and this, the PhD, this is his daily journal that he published every day of going to speech therapy, all the activities that he did, the sentences that he wrote, all the things that he did. He published that. And for certain personalities, oh my gosh, any educators, anyone who really wants to delve into it, it's wonderful, it's fabulous. Then he also has another one, and this is The Secret to Recovery with Aphasia. And this is a little bit more about describing the things that you go through when you're in therapy, and you know, the repetition, learning problem solving. But there was one thing in here that I learned today when I was kind of prepping for this afternoon that I found fascinating, that no one ever had shared with me, but I live with it, and that's auditory processing. And the interesting thing about that was, he says, I hadn't been told about auditory processing until he lived it. And it has to do with, you can hear, but the brain requires the process to listen as well as speak. And so he and his wife had some, not conflicts, but frustrations, like anyone who's a spouse or a caregiver for someone with aphasia, that he thought he was hearing what she said, but he realized that he often would not hear the first 3 or 4 words of what was said. And so would often answer incorrectly or respond incorrectly because they missed those first few words. So he could hear the words, but it was the uptake from the time it goes in your ear as a word processed in your brain. So the slow uptake meant that those first few words were gone before the brain was engaging with auditory sound. I thought that was just fascinating, and I know that that is true. And that's going to help me even to this day when I sometimes talk faster than John would like. I have a granddaughter here that's chuckling. She might have heard her papa say, "Slow it up, Marylee," a time or two. Well, yeah, he says it to you too, doesn't he? Yeah, he does. I'm going to wrap up here in a little bit, but I found a resource that I really, really liked, and it was Guidelines for Communicating with People with Aphasia. And it's got 30 or 40 of them, but I circled the ones that really, really touched me and touched, you know, my journey. And that is, if you really want communication, it's best, and this is for most neurological disorders, but particularly aphasia, but a lot of neurological disorders, communication is best in a calm, relaxed environment. It's most successful in a calm environment. We sometimes have our television on in the kitchen, watching the news a little bit while we're eating. And if we're trying to have a conversation, we have to mute the television. We simply can't have a conversation with the television on. So multiple auditory stimulations shut down his ability to communicate. It's also most successful when participants aren't fatigued. And John has, time and time again, when he's tired or frustrated or upset, it feels as though he's misfiring. Everything in his brain is misfiring. And we just don't communicate well. The main goal in communication is not to be perfect, but to get the point across. Whatever methods you have to use to get the point across is okay. I've drawn pictures, he's drawn pictures, whatever works. This one is the one that I'm reminded of every minute of every day, and anyone who knows me agrees. What is it, Phoebe?
I don't know.
Talking too fast. It affects the ability for them to understand the speech. And John reminds me of this so often. And when I'm challenged with him he'll say, I don't know what you say. That's my clue to slow down. And he says that with great regularity. I don't know what you say. And I know that I've talked too fast and he didn't track with all my words. And it's just how I'm wired. So, what can I say? Communicating with the individual, don't speak for the individual unless it's absolutely necessary. And we've learned, it's been years that we've been working on this for many, many years. And like doctor's appointments and things, when they ask, he can say his date of birth and his name. He can't say, he doesn't have our address. He can't articulate our address. But I have him answer all the questions that he can. And he is I'm proud of this. He's very comfortable saying, I can't read anymore, or I can't write anymore. My wife will have to do that. And he's comfortable with that. And I'm happy about that because it gives him the independence that he needs as a man, but accepting the fact that there are certain things that he can't do. And I typically don't step in and speak for him unless I see that it's necessary or it's a situation where there's a lot of, I think of one doctor's office where it was noisy in the waiting room, and I knew he couldn't understand what the receptionist was saying because of the background noise. And so I just quietly stepped in and took care of that. Don't pretend to know what they're saying and try and fake it, because that's kind of insulting. And I've done that a few times. Sometimes when you're the recipient of this aphasia language, you get tired, or you get yourself, you get tired, and I've been known to think, is it really this important for us to figure out? But it's really not good to pretend. It's fine to say, I don't understand. I will often say, help me out, or, what are we talking about? A man that's in our chimes choir has severe aphasia, and his girlfriend passed unexpectedly, and he called, and he was in tears, and he's got really, really severe aphasia. And I knew he was upset. I didn't know why. And I repeated his name, and I repeated that he'd gotten the right person. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. Take a breath. Let's try it again. It took 4 times, and he finally said, girlfriend dead. And then I could pick up from that and follow through with the people that I needed to contact and do what I needed to do from that point. Then I could ask yes and no questions, which I knew he was good at, versus him having to explain something. But help me out, guide me along, take your time. When we go to our stroke camps, we all do that. That's one of the blessings of all of our volunteers is we've got time, we'll take time, we'll wait for people to communicate. So I think but avoid pretending, because, and sometimes John will say, you don't know what I said. And sometimes I'll say, you're right, I don't. Is it important? Let's go at it. Avoid using open-ended questions, and that's what I did with this gentleman recently, is instead of asking him for an answer that I wasn't sure he could give, I asked yes and no questions. And I sometimes will, rather than say, what do you want for dinner? Do you want soup and sandwich, or do you want macaroni and cheese? I don't know, I just made that up. Because macaroni and cheese is always good. Don't assume that they always understand everything that you're saying. Over the years, I've learned with John that I can kind of recognize when he doesn't understand what I'm talking about. And he doesn't have a problem of telling me that. But if you're new to this, or you're with someone, that you're not as close to as maybe a spouse or a family member, just don't assume that they know. Repeat or rephrase whenever necessary. Sometimes making the question a little simpler or the statement simpler, but never keep it simple, but don't ever talk down. Talk in adult-like situation. Talk as if they are an adult, because dumbing it down and making it sound childlike is insulting and it's demeaning, and we should never do that to our loved ones. The other one that I laugh at, because, a lot of us, I don't know if it's just women, but a lot of certain personalities, but a lot of us women talk in stories, and I'm guilty of talking in stories. And sometimes John will ask a question and it will become a story. And he doesn't need a story. He doesn't always understand a story. And he won't maybe track with a story. Because one of the things I found, he can do one, maybe two things, but if I give him three things that I'm talking about or three things that we're kind of doing, then he can't remember any of it. So, kind of one thing at a time, but still doing it in a respectful, in a loving, and a respectful manner. So, I don't know if anybody has any questions. I am on my iPad so I can kind of see the questions. A lot of charades goes on in the early stages. And one other thing, those of you that maybe haven't had speech for a while but still struggle, there are reassessments. Insurance companies and even Medicare can often do a reassessment and help with something new with regards to speech therapy. So we need to always keep that in mind, that there may be benefits that are out there. It doesn't ever hurt to ask about those benefits. So that is what I have to say about that. I always like to kind of end on a happy note, and I'll talk a little bit about what we've got going on. I have another resource that I use with great regularity, and it has some little cards for people that have a stroke that are through the journey. And this one I found today that I really liked, and it is Celebrate Your Victories, Big and Small. And I think sometimes when we're going through this, John used to be so excited with a new word, and I think my mother might be watching, and he'd say, "Granny, did you hear me spit that one out?" He would be so tickled because, they learn their own phrases, the things that they can say. And he'd be so proud of a new word. Then he'd be frustrated because he'd have to say it a lot or use it a lot before it would be stored in that new part of the brain. So it was always kind of interesting in that, did you hear me spit that one out? And sometimes he would remember that he had said a word, but then he couldn't retrieve it, the next time. So it is a long, lifelong journey. We have come to a good place. We really do, pretty well as far as communicating is concerned. Not perfect, because none of us are. None of us are ever going to be perfect. So I thank you so much for joining. And if you find anyone else that might be interested in some of our topics, this video, along with all of our videos, will be saved and posted on our YouTube channel, which we're going to start promoting and giving you the link to that. So you can go, if someone's not on Facebook, they would be able to go access these videos if it might be beneficial for those that aren't on Facebook. So we're trying to cover all bases and stay in touch with everyone. We were not able to do any of our stroke camps this year in 2020. We have a number of them already scheduled for 2021, God willing. But we want to stay connected, and we want to be supporting everyone on their post-stroke journey. So thanks again for tuning in. Let your friends know, and we will see you again on Friday.